Now on to the second of our two questions of the week, and it's back to the Premier League. Which players should be most disappointed to miss out on the Premier League this year?
There's a couple for that. And it was one other thing I meant to say on the last question that I forgot. And that's that all these players were in the top 20 in averages on the Players' Championship last year. So, yes, if you think maybe it should be the top 8, but there's really not that much difference. You're talking a couple points. They're all over 95. But there were a couple players who were averaging even higher than that. Obviously, Josh Rock and Damon Hedda, who seem to have not done enough over the course of the year. They each averaged over 98, Hedda won the World Cup, but just didn't get it done on television at the end of the year. Josh Rock probably was still a year away. We need to see him really have a televised breakthrough first. The World Championships was pretty darn good, but we really need to see him, make a run to the semifinal, get another year under his belt. But then you come to the next person in the overall averages, and he's probably the one who feels most hard done, and he's because he was fourth in averages in the Players' Championship last year, won 4 Euro Tour events. He's the highest ranked player not selected, number 5 in the world. Didn't continue that trend of 4s, but being 5th is not all that bad. And that's Luke Humphries. But again, you could say Luke Humphries played his way out at the back end of the year, and including at the beginning of this year. Because what did Luke Humphries do in the Masters? He lost that first match to Chris Dobie. Okay, that's not the worst result, possibly. Played okay in that match, but he also didn't really look that good in the 2 World Series events. He just didn't look fully up to that Premier League level. And at the World Championships, he went out in the last 16, didn't get really put together that run that he needed before going out in the 4th round at the World Championships. And yeah, so from that you can say he played his way out. But again, he made 2 semifinals in majors near the end of the year. He made the semifinals of the Grand Slam. He made, before losing to Nathan Aspinall, made the semifinals of the Players' Championship final just a week later before going out to the eventual winner, Michael van Gerwen. It's tough to say why Luke was left out. Those 4 Euro Tours, just topping the Pro Tour Order of Merit, winning 2 Players' Championship events, 6 titles overall over the course of the year. And yes, he didn't make a final on television, but he had deep runs at almost everything. It seems really harsh on him not to get in, especially since there were 3 players selected who didn't win a major this year either. And in the case of Dimitri Van den Bergh, didn't make a final, but at least he had won a pair of World Series events, won those televised titles. And Johnny Clayton had topped the Premier League the year before. So there are arguments to be made, but it really seems like this is a situation where Luke Humphries had the Premier League spot on lockdown and played his way out. A mix of those World Series events and that early exit at the World Championships and that early exit in the Masters, and he was left out as a result. And that brings up the question, should he turn down the World Series events? What if he had said he wasn't interested in going to those World Series events? He's getting ready for the Masters and didn't want to go there. Would he have been selected to the Premier League? I don't know. It would have been tough to say to turn him down, but they might have then said, no, we're not selecting him because he had turned down an invite to something. But it does leave me wondering if he would have been better off skipping those World Series events. It seems like he played himself out. Beyond that, as we said, Rob Cross said he wasn't interested. I think Rob Cross otherwise would have had a decent gripe. Obviously, Danny Noppert as the UK Open champion and Ross Smith as the European Championship have a gripe to do as well. And, you can say Damon Hedda. He won the World Cup. He was the highest average in the Players' Championship events this year of anyone who wasn't selected, the highest average of anyone who isn't Michael van Gerwen. And you know how much he was behind Michael van Gerwen in the Players' Championship events? 0.01 points. He basically was as good, or at least was averaging as well as Van Gerwen in the Players' Championship events over the course of the year. Again, I'm ignoring Daryl Pilgrim because he only played 1 match. There could be an argument to be made for Damon Hedda, but again, likewise, he didn't perform in the televised events at the very end of the year, and maybe he played his way out as a result, but the World Cup has never been a guarantee anyway. But beyond that, I do think it's Luke Humphries who has the biggest gripe, even though he didn't win a major. But again, you can make that argument. Just like I made the argument that all 3 were deserved, you can make the argument that everyone left out was deserved. They didn't do enough over the course of the year, especially at the back end when everyone was watching and everyone was asking, what have you done to earn your spot?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you make there about Luke Humphries and the World Series. And I said earlier about if Chris Dobey had have not won the Masters, would I have got my full set of 8 out of 8 predictions right? Probably not, because I think Luke Humphries is the player that's been the unfortunate one here that's missed out, because we've had a precedent the last couple of years. We've talked about it. The player that wins the Masters gets in the Premier League, and when you see someone do it again, as we saw at the weekend, it was always going to be very difficult to leave Chris Dobey out of the Premier League. So I think Luke Humphries is probably the one that was in the Premier League up until that final match start went in on Sunday night in Milton Keynes. And that seems to be where our listeners are heading as well, because we've had more than 1,000 votes on this poll that we've got running on Twitter at the moment. Who should be the most disappointed to miss out? Luke Humphries, 61%, Danny Noppert, 15%, and then you've got Ross Smith and Joe Cullen, both on 12%. A few of our listeners, El Manga, saying Humphries, he was the third best of the year. James O'Hara has to be Luke Humphries, 4 Euro Tour titles and still can't get into the Premier League. Not sure what more he is meant to do. And we've also got Joan, who says, in my opinion, they're wrong with the lack of transparency with the criteria when selecting the players. They cause us to have controversy and angry people every year. Hard to understand that Humphries and Noppert are not in this year. And we've had as well a few of those players that missed out have been on social media. They've talked about it. Joe Cullen said, gutted with my omission from the Premier League. Don't feel it's justified at all, if I'm honest. In fact, it's a kick in the balls. I'm certainly not the only player who rightly feels hard done by. Felt I deserved another chance after being 1 millimetre from winning. Been a tough day. Luke Humphries said, can't deny that I'm incredibly gutted not to be involved in this year's Premier League. I've really worked hard in 2022 to get the results I did. 5 senior ranking titles and 2 major semi-finals. And all I can say is I'm proud of my achievements, even if they wasn't good enough. And Ross Smith as well, coming out and saying, as the reigning European champion and the biggest 180 hitter in the world, so he's even better than you, Burton, in the second half of 2022. I'm obviously absolutely gutted not to be included, but I respect the decision and wish all the players the very best for the event. And I think this is a product of how open the PDC is at the moment and how many world-class players they've got right now, because I put the stat out on Twitter, the years in which a player has won their first major in the PDC, and you go back 2013 to 2016, we didn't have any new winners. And then for the last 7 years, including this year now with Chris Dobey, going from 2017 onwards, we've had one minimum each year. Just got to look at the players that have missed out and the achievements that they've had. You listed them there. Players were very close, and in any other year, they'd have probably got in. You talk about a player in Joe Cullen who had that match start. He was the width of a wire away from winning the Premier League, and that's how fine the margins are. If he'd have hit that double, he'd have won the Premier League. There'd have been no dispute. He would have been in the lineup again this year. So it is difficult to say, which players deserved it the most, which players will be the most disappointed. And I think whichever way the PDC went, picking 8 players from that pool of 11, 12, 13 players, it was always going to be a decision which was never going to please everyone. But based purely on achievements alone, I think Danny Noppert, for me, winning the UK Open, the other deep runs he's had, I think the early exit of the World Championship and the Masters, that killed his chance. But yeah, I'm with you. I think Luke Humphries, out of the 4 we listed there, the world number 5, all the success he had last year, I think he was very, very close. And the turn of one game, that Masters final going one way and not the other way, that's what's kept him out of the Premier League, I think, in the end.